Welcome, Wargamers, to the perfectly safe, what could go wrong, Mortal Realms, because today we are continuing the Dawnbringers series, and I am so excited to talk about this. It's an epic collection of campaign books for Age of Sigmar, much like we've seen with the Broken Realm series, where it's like a collection of sort of thinner, narrative-centric books that are really pushing the narrative forward and giving us great missions and new models and all kinds of stuff in support of it. I did a full video series on the last book. Admittedly, that one I felt, and I did review it at the end, it's a lot of stage setting rather than important, elements of plot going forward, but it is very relevant, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed some of the stories of the Fire Slayers in there, so go check that out. I have a link down below. But today, we are talking about Dawnbringers' Reign of the Brute. And now, within the context of our narrative, things are really cooking, right? We had the stage set for trouble with our assaults on Akshi and Gairan in the last one, and now all powers involved are looking to really make their moves. Chief of which is Sigmar, who is now launching the most massive Dawnbringer crusade in the realm's history, and two of them simultaneously. Both from Hammerhall, but one from Akshi and one from Gairan, setting out to expand the God King's grasp on the mortal realms. These are like major city plans. This venture is called the Twin Tailed Crusade. And it was really hinted at in the first book, Harbingers. We talked about that there's a lot of discussion and back and forth about it, but the true scale of what they unleashed here is kind of hard to imagine. Never mind just imagining it, it's hard to feed, clothe, arm, and so on. And so we're going to talk all about the Twin Tailed Crusade today. Really quickly before I do though, I want to say I turned off ads on all my YouTube videos because advertising here is getting so overwhelming. And so if you want to support the channel, support me, my wife, our cats, please use their link down below for Noble Knight Games here in the Midwest. They're an awesome ma and pa shop that's just online. And while I always recommend people go support their local hobby store, it's hard for hobby stores to carry everything under the sun, so if you're looking for supplies for a new painting project or anything like that, go check them out. In addition, I want to throw out a shout out to Goonhammer. I'm part of their media network where basically, if you're looking for any kind of tutorial, guide, or anything for getting into Age of Sigmar, this is a blog website that has a ton of new player resources that you really don't want to miss, so go check out Goonhammer. So, Dawnbringers 2, Reign of the Brute, is set up similar to the first book in its format. There's one chapter that's kind of a big lore dump at the top that applies to the entire book, right? It applies to both sides of Hammerhall, basically is what they're saying. And then from there, the chapters split into the different theaters of war, one in Akshi, one in Gairan. And so I kind of wanted to match this because it makes note-taking very straightforward for me and very simple. And so today we're going to talk about information that is relevant to both crusades, but not detail their journeys quite yet. And the reason being, once these stories begin, they are a roller coaster of awesome. This is a really epic story, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, but we need some context to get started. And really that comes down to the basic question of what is different about this crusade than ones in the past, right? It was kind of foreshadowed, but a lot of things were foreshadowed in the last book, including Troggoths the size of mountains. You know, there's a lot going on. What is the actual issue with this? And there's a few things that I broke down to why these are different. The first one being the scale, right? And I mentioned this at the top. Nothing this large has been attempted. Most Dawnbringer crusades, we find out, are relatively small. They have a fount of Aqua Guarana, some basic prefabricated structures that all look like they're built from IKEA, so they're also flush with Allen wrenches, but they're small by design. The idea is maybe we can sneak around and spread and kind of sow the oats of civilization across the realms. And then kind of, build each other up in isolation and then network it all together. But truth is, that was not working too well. If the story Dominion by Darius Hinks is any example, these are brutal affairs. And if they're smaller, there's less defense. You just become, a slightly larger or smaller prey. We talked about these in the last book. There were tons of reports that this approach was just not working. It ended in thousands of very unnecessary deaths. False visions leading people, into massive traps or just realms-sized catastrophes. Crusades being wiped out one after the other, all trying to reach the same dubious spot of like, why is this spot calling out to us, but everyone goes there dies. They lose those weapons, that food, that ammunition. And one of the things that's notable in this that wasn't really noted too much in earlier Cities of Sigmar books is that they only pack enough food for you to get through to your first harvest. So these guys are walking out there. They have to plant immediately with their Aqua Grandest. They're almost assured to be able to get some food, but they're not carrying much. So if anything goes wrong, they're in trouble. So those are normal ones, right? But the Twin Tailed Crusade is a different matter. And it's important to remember that this is happening all around all these lesser crusades too. Like all these smaller cities, or not smaller, but satellite ones like Excelsis and all those, they're still sending out normal Dawnbringer crusades. This is happening simultaneously. Imagine 6 or 7 of those lesser ones all joined together. So you have literal thousands of colonists, or pioneers, whatever word you want to use. A full military detachment, not a guard like we saw in Dominion, where it's, a few guard and then there was a Stormcast like unit that came with them, like just a couple of them, that just escorted them to where they were supposed to go, and then they were supposed to ditch them. Wes, I was like, oh, that's cold. But like, there's none of that. This is a full army. Whatever city we found, this is its army from day one. So you have Stormcast Eternals, Cities of Sigmar, and any allies who want a block on this new quote-unquote city. So like you might have Fire Slayers. Yeah, we want to have an outpost here. Daughters of Cain want to have a temple. Whatever it might be. And not only are the forces at work much, much larger in scale and scope, but also the supplies that they are carrying. And this is a big one we talked about in the first book. A heavy theme was on production and manufacturing. Can the rate of expansion of these Dawnbringer Crusades possibly be sustained? Because it's insane right now. Well, they're carrying enough food and supplies to last several seasons, which is fantastic. So they have time to actually cultivate the earth, maybe even build up a reserve faster, maybe not focus at all initially on food. They now have time, if they get there fast enough, to just focus entirely on defense, to like found a strong city and then get to cultivating. Like, it's not rocket science, but it's just stuff that you learn through trial and error, and it's just people got tired of trying before the errors were learned. Now, another difference between this and a normal Dawnbringer Crusade is kind of how it was assembled, right? From the moment it was announced, excitement burst at the idea. Now, it wasn't random beggars with nothing to lose on a crusade, although there were nobles and stuff like that in the smaller ones. The overwhelming majority of people who went on those, they had nothing, and it was the gamble to cement your place in history and have a lineage for your children, basically. But people who had well-established lives weren't doing that. But on the Twin Tailed Crusade, it's strong, healthy men and women, business owners, merchants. Again, they are trying to plant a functional city with trade routes day one. So if you're like, hey, I'm getting a lot of competition in this city, I'm just going to move to the newest, most big open market that there is. That's smart. And they're moving in a tide that is way safer than anything that came before it. Which is like, it's not really mind-boggling. I feel like the writers at Games Workshop are just like writing in that the Cities of Sigmar folks, that their leaders are just astounded that people get more excited for plans that don't cheat or treat their lives as cheap. So it's just like, yeah, no duh. You mean we move safer and have more guns and food? Yeah, of course I'll go with that one. But as town criers are going out announcing this, they had the easiest time ever. People just wanted out of the cities. But they wanted to take the security of the cities with them, and that made it much more palatable. The Forges of Akshi were partially restored from the fire of the first book, and it's been working non-stop to arm this endeavor. And the same goes for Guran, except they're stockpiling food at an insane rate. Same thing for water. And like I mentioned in the first book, we get these great little comments about what's happening from the minds of the people seeing it. Just, are there various leaders who are not so jazzed about XYZ kind of a thing? Anyone joining this crusade, the Twin Tailed Crusade, is super jazzed. They're like really into it. This is the coolest thing ever. Anyone who's staying in Akshi or Guran, the Hammerhall sides, are really wary about it. Not because they don't want to follow orders. It's not that they aren't happy to see the kingdom expanding and so on, but because there's such an inordinate amount of Hammerhall's defenses about to just walk out the front door. Like I mentioned, nothing ever stops in these stories, so threats are coming every single day. Chaos warbands, undead hordes, anything that destruction just meanders around, right? There was an ogre tribe or a bunch of gits looking for bottles. They just kind of meander around. And so what happens when they see the single largest crusade ever launched walk to the left, and the really big city that they've always wanted to attack to the right is really quiet all of a sudden? Not to mention, the place that is now quiet is now your manufacturing and agricultural powerhouses. And I talked about this a little bit. I'm a big fan of history, and one of the interesting things that really started to come about in World War I was this idea of the home front. How much of the factory workers, farmers, and general population can you take away from a society and still have it function? It's like, well, you're going to send these crusades out, but you need people to run these places to make weapons for the next one. Or now you need to rearm your own guards, or you know what I mean? Like, it just puts such a burden on the society that's losing all those resources. And how much can you take away before you stall growth, or it loses the ability to functionally defend itself? And so the city leaders of Hammerhall, both Akshi and Ghiran, although separately and kind of together, are looking at this, and they're going to be like, how are we going to survive? If they leave and plant a new city, but this one gets destroyed, what have we gained? And the counterpoint is, well, Caution has gotten thousands of us killed already by being stingy with how we send out crusades. And then there's the counterpoint of like, this will be the last crusade of only significance if everything that's meant to manufacture new ones gets destroyed and there's no one to run the forges. And then, you just kind of go back and forth. Counterpoint. Forges are meaningless if you can't use the tools that they make to flourish. It goes back and forth. And what I like about this is because it puts the story in a perspective where neither side is wrong. It's just about their priorities and their values. The people staying are worried about staying alive. The people going are really confident about all the things they're taking away from the first group. And the last thing I want to touch on here is their plan. And so with these epic armies and colony plants on the move, what is the plan? And we're given very little detail at this opening section of the campaign book. The Akshu Crusade is planning to head east across the Great Parch, which has been the setting for a number of huge events in Age of Sigmar history, mostly during the Realmgate Wars. That was the big one. That's the epic site of Vandus Hammerhand and Korgus Kull, having their fight off at the end there. And they're going to move into the mountain valleys known as the Talons. Now, I couldn't find a picture of anything that mentions the Talons specifically, but there is a lot of mountain ranges in Akshi right around the Great Parch, so we're assuming they're headed east into one of those. As for the other crusade, the Ghiran side, they are crossing the wilds of Verdia, and they're basically headed north to the northernmost tip of the Everspring swath, but we're not really given a lot of, detail about their actual heading. They just want to head north, and what's interesting on the map here is it kind of bottlenecks right there, and so it presents an interesting opportunity to get ambushed from the left or the right, and we don't know which direction they are going, so I'm very interested to see what happens there. And we'll end this video, like we end all of them, by talking about why is this cool. Y'all have no idea how pumped I am for this book, and really just this series. Campaign stuff to me is so much more interesting and greater than battle tomes because we see things in action and in context. I like to think of battle tomes as like propaganda for your army. Everything's the biggest, everything's the most cataclysmic and the world ending. But when you have a campaign book and all those things have to be pitted against each other and work together in a story format, it's just, to me, much more interesting. Seeing where armies are moving and how, generals size each other up is really one of the more fascinating parts of real world history. It's never mind when you're tracking the movements around mountains that want to eat you and your enemy general is a ghost or an orc or something like that. It's just crazy stuff. I love it. And speaking of my affinity for history, one thing I wanted to nerd out and bring up, if you didn't know, it has me thinking about naval warfare in World War I, which is no one knew how to keep ships safe during transit, specifically from the German subs and torpedoes and stuff like that. And it took multiple countries innovating and lots of lost, trade ships and that kind of stuff for people to figure out the convoy. And that's when that was developed. In the same way, these smaller crusades just kind of keep burning out. And so the cultures behind them were like, we need to try something new. And this is, I think, their best attempt at mimicking that. A convoy, massive ships going together to protect one another, have overlapping fields of fire and vision and all these kinds of things. Same thing here with the Twin Tailed Crusade. A massive endeavor meant that at a moment's notice, there is a full army on hand to stop and fight anything. And I'm going to give you a spoiler alert for the rest of the week here. It gets a heck of a field test. That's what I'll say. But I want to end this video with a quick question here. Which theater of war, right, Akshi or Giran, would you want to be in? They both sound like their own kind of miserable. I think for me in particular, I think that I would go Akshi. The bugs and the swamps and stuff of Giran would get to me too much. The idea of so many living things trying to kill you, eat you. Nah, I'm not having any of that. I'd rather, I'm from San Antonio. I'd rather just walk across the hot asphalt desert that is the Great Parch than deal with bugs and stuff like that. No, thank you. Let me know your thoughts down below. Can't wait to read them, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.